Hey everyone, we're working hard to get our first 1,000 subscribers, sign up and you won't regret it. The last time I spoke for a living, I was holding a mic with my name on it. Back then, people said my voice felt like late-night coffee, warm, steady, a little rough at the edges. I worked mornings on a local station outside Chicago, the kind with loyal callers who didn't even say hello anymore. They'd just start talking about their divorce, their commute, their kid who wouldn't sleep, and I'd guide them through the noise like it was my job to make life feel less lonely. It was. Then one rainy Tuesday, a truck ran a red light. I don't remember the impact. I remember light, white and buzzing like a blown speaker. I remember waking up with a throat that felt filled with sand and metal. I remember reaching for my face and feeling something wrong under my fingertips, something stitched, swollen, raised. And I remember trying to speak. Nothing came out. Not a whisper. Not a rasp. Just air, like a broken bellows. My wife, Lauren, sat beside the hospital bed in a beige sweater like she'd dressed for a business meeting. Her eyes kept flicking to the bandages on my cheek and the red marks that crawled up toward my temple. She held my hand, but it felt like she was holding a stranger's, careful, temporary. At first, everyone told me it was swelling. Trauma. Time. The ENT doctor spoke in clean, careful sentences, the kind people use when they're trying to soften a hard truth. Vocal cord damage. Nerve involvement. Surgery might help. Therapy definitely would. It was a long road. I nodded like I understood, even though all I could think was, my voice paid our rent. Lauren tried, for about a month, to act like we were still us. She brought soup I couldn't swallow. She put on TV shows and laughed too loudly at jokes I couldn't respond to. She asked questions and answered them herself before I could even type on my phone. Friends sent flowers. Coworkers visited once. My program director came by and talked about how the station family was behind me, and then, without meaning to, mentioned they were figuring out coverage. Coverage. Like I was weather. When the hospital bills arrived, the vibe in our apartment changed. The air got tight. Lauren stopped humming in the kitchen. She started leaving the mail in stacks like it might grow into something manageable on its own. My savings went first. Then the credit cards. Then the small retirement account I'd been proud of because it made me feel like an adult. My face healed into something that didn't feel like mine. The scars were the worst part, not because they hurt, but because they announced me before I could. Before, I could walk into a room and people would hear me and then see me. Now they saw me first. Their eyes did the math. Their expressions went into that careful, polite mode people use around tragedy. Lauren couldn't hide her reaction. I caught her staring at my cheek in the bathroom mirror once, like she was trying to understand how it happened to her. It wasn't just the voice. It was everything that came with losing it, the helplessness, the new routines, the dependence. I went from being the guy people relied on to tell them what the weather was like to the guy who needed help opening a bottle of medicine. The night she left, I had just gotten off the phone, off the silent call, with my insurance company. More paperwork. More denial. More hoops. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, typing with shaking hands. Lauren stood by the sink with her back to me, arms folded. She didn't even turn all the way around when she said it. I didn't sign up for this. I typed, for what? She exhaled like I was being difficult on purpose. For this life. For the staring. The bills. The silence. I typed, I'm still me. That's when she finally looked right at me, eyes hard and bright, like she'd been building courage all day. And she said, I don't need a mute freak. I didn't cry. Not then. It was like my body couldn't process one more loss in the same week. I just sat there while she grabbed a suitcase, already half-packed, which told me this wasn't a sudden decision, and walked out like she was leaving a bad restaurant. The door clicked shut. The apartment felt too quiet, like it was waiting for my laugh track to return. The next morning, my phone lit up with texts from coworkers. The station had decided to move in a different direction. My name was still on the old promotional posters in the hallway, but my show was being rebranded with a new host by Monday. I didn't even blame them. Radio is a cruel business, but it's honest about it. What I didn't expect was what came after. When you lose your voice, you start noticing voices. Everywhere. In elevator speakers. On hold music. In the way strangers say, excuse me. In the way people assume silence means you're not there. I started carrying a little notebook around because typing on my phone took too long in real life. People would talk to me like I was slow, like my throat injury had traveled up into my brain. One day at the rehab center, I sat in the waiting room next to a teenage boy wearing hearing aids. He was signing to his mother, quick, fluid movements that looked like a language from the future. His mom signed back, clumsy but determined. They laughed together. No sound. But it was still laughter. You could see it in the way their shoulders moved, in the way their eyes crinkled. Something in my chest shifted. I went home and looked up basic sign language videos. Then I fell into a world I didn't know existed: deaf creators, accessibility tech, captioning debates, the real gap between "we care" and "we built something that actually works." And then I hit the same wall over and over. Apps that promised easy communication but felt like they were designed by people who had never needed them. Speech-to-text that failed in noisy rooms. Captioning that lagged. Interfaces that assumed perfect hearing and perfect vision and perfect patience. I didn't have a voice. But I still had my brain. And for the first time since the accident, I had something else too. Anger that didn't just eat me alive. Anger that wanted to build. I opened my old laptop, the one I'd used to edit audio clips for the station, and started teaching myself to code, slowly, painfully, the way you learn anything when you're desperate. I wasn't thinking about becoming rich. I was thinking about not being powerless. I was thinking about the look on Lauren's face when she said that word, freak, like it belonged to me now. And I was thinking about how silence can still be a weapon. 2 months later, I got an email from Lauren. It was short. Cold. Like a business memo. She said she needed closure and wanted to talk about next steps. I stared at that email for a long time, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. Because I realized something that made my stomach drop. She hadn't filed for divorce. Neither had I. And the silence between us wasn't just emotional anymore. It was legal. And I had no idea how expensive that kind of silence could get. I didn't reply to Lauren's email right away. Not because I didn't know what to say, typing made honesty way too easy, but because I didn't trust myself not to beg. And begging felt like giving her one more thing. So I did what I'd learned to do since the accident: I prepared. I started with the basics. I pulled up our old bank statements, the ones that had made Lauren's face tighten every time the mail arrived. I found the month she left and traced everything after it: rent paid by me, medical bills in my name, groceries, utilities, the 2 times her card still showed up at the pharmacy before she finally stopped using the shared account. Then I printed it all. Not because I was dramatic, because paper feels real in a way a screen doesn't, and I needed something solid. A week later, I met with a divorce attorney. His name was Martin Shaw. Mid-50s, crisp suit, calm eyes. He watched me type on my phone and didn't flinch or interrupt. When he spoke, he didn't use that pity voice people used on me now. He treated me like a man with a problem. He asked when she left. I typed, 10 months ago. No filing. No separation agreement. Martin leaned back. That's unusual. Did she take anything? Money? Property? I typed, suitcase. Some clothes. Not much else. And you've been supporting yourself since? I typed, barely. I left his office with a list: gather proof of abandonment, document finances, keep communication in writing. He told me that being legally married didn't automatically mean she could waltz in later and take half of everything, but also, depending on the state, timing, and what happened next, it could get messy. Messy was attorney language for expensive. The thing was, my life after Lauren wasn't glamorous. It was lonely and complicated. I spent mornings in speech therapy where I tried to coax sound out of a throat that didn't want to cooperate, and nights watching coding tutorials until my eyes burned. I lived on instant noodles, cheap coffee, and whatever stubbornness had survived the crash. The first version of my app was ugly. It was basically a fast, offline speech-to-text tool designed for loud environments, with a text-to-speech option that sounded human enough not to embarrass people in public. I built it because every existing option either lagged, required internet, or turned background noise into nonsense. I tested it at the rehab center. The teenage boy from the waiting room tried it, smiled, and signed something to his mom. She typed back for me. He says it's the first time he's seen something that doesn't make him feel like a problem. I went home and cried so hard I nearly threw up. Then I fixed the bugs. I added features based on feedback from deaf users, real feedback, not corporate user experience surveys. A mode for group conversations. Better caption timing. A tap to repeat function for misunderstandings. Emergency phrases. A way to save common replies so you weren't forced to type your identity every time you met a stranger. It wasn't just an app. It was me building a world where silence didn't mean helplessness. When I finally launched it, I expected maybe a few hundred downloads. The first week, I got 10,000. The second week, it hit 100,000. A deaf creator on TikTok posted about it, praising how it didn't treat deafness like a defect. Then a YouTube accessibility channel did a review. Then a journalist wrote a piece about the radio host who lost his voice and built a bridge. The irony of that headline almost killed me. I couldn't do interviews, obviously, so everything was written. And because everything was written, I got to control my story in a way radio never let me. The app got picked up by a small nonprofit first. Then a larger one. Then a school district started using it. Then an airport accessibility team reached out. Money started coming in slowly, then quickly, then in waves that made me suspicious. I kept checking the analytics like they were lying to me. I paid off the credit cards. Then the hospital. Then I replaced my ancient laptop. Then I hired a freelance developer to help with back-end scaling. By the time the first acquisition email arrived, someone offering to buy the whole thing, I had learned enough to know I didn't want to sell too early. And that's when Lauren showed up again. Not physically. Not yet. She messaged me on Facebook from a new profile picture, glossy hair, bright teeth, the kind of smile people wear when they're marketing themselves. Her message was long. Emotional. Full of words like, proud, always believed, hard times, we should talk. She even wrote that she'd kept praying for me. I stared at it, numb. Because I knew her. And Lauren didn't pray. I didn't respond. 2 days later, a letter arrived. Not an email. Not a message. A letter from a law office. I read it 3 times, my hands shaking harder each time, because my brain couldn't believe what my eyes were seeing. Lauren was requesting equitable distribution of marital assets. She claimed she'd supported me during the most difficult period of my recovery. She claimed she'd sacrificed her own opportunities. She claimed the app, the thing I built with my scarred face and broken voice and insomnia, was a marital asset because we were still legally married. She wanted half. Half of the company. Half of the accounts. Half of the future. I sat on the floor with the letter spread out in front of me like a crime scene photo. It wasn't just greed. It was revision. It was her trying to rewrite history so she didn't have to live with what she'd done. I took the letter to Martin. He read it, then looked up at me slowly. She's serious, he said. And because you never divorced, she's not completely out of the game. I typed, she abandoned me. Martin nodded. That helps. A lot. But we need proof. Not feelings. Proof. I thought I had proof. I had her email. The month she left. The empty closet. The bank statements. Then Martin asked a question that made my stomach drop. Do you have anything, he said, that shows what she said when she left? I froze. Because I did. But it wasn't written. It was spoken. And I had no voice to repeat it. The only reason I remembered the exact sentence, mute freak, was because it burned into my memory like acid. But memory doesn't hold up in court. Martin tapped the letter. If this goes to a judge, it becomes a credibility contest. We need something that pins her version of events to the wall. I typed, slowly, there might be something. He raised an eyebrow. I didn't tell him yet, because I hadn't opened that part of my past in months. But there was one thing Lauren had forgotten about me. Something I'd learned in radio. Something I'd done for years without thinking. And if it still existed, it could ruin her. Radio teaches you paranoia in a friendly package. We called it backups. It sounded boring. Technical. But it was really fear that a segment would vanish, that an advertiser would claim you promised something you didn't, that a caller would accuse you of saying something off-air. So we recorded everything. Not just shows. Prep calls. Planning meetings. Sponsor reads. Sometimes even our own rehearsals, because when your voice is your product, you keep copies like a musician keeps masters. And I had kept a habit long after it was necessary. After the accident, I couldn't let go of my old life, so I clung to it in the only way I could, audio files. I had a folder on an external hard drive labeled Archive. It was messy, unorganized, full of MP3s and waves with date-stamped names. I hadn't opened it in months because it felt like opening a coffin. That night, I plugged the drive in. My laptop whirred. The folder loaded. Hundreds of files appeared. I scrolled past old show intros, caller segments, my own laugh echoing back at me like a ghost. It made my throat tighten in a way no scar tissue ever had. Then I found it. A file named with a date, the night Lauren left. Not because I'd planned it. Because my brain had still been running on radio mode. I had been working on speech therapy exercises that day, trying to force any kind of sound. I'd opened my old recording software out of habit, hit record to track progress, and left it running while I paced around the apartment. When Lauren started talking, the mic was still hot. I clicked the file, heart pounding. The waveform showed spikes, her voice, sharp and loud. Mine was mostly silence, tiny little breaths. I pressed play. At first, it was just background noise, kitchen sounds, the hum of the fridge. Then Lauren's voice came in clear. Not courtroom clear, but real-life clear. I listened to the whole thing sitting perfectly still, like any movement might change what I was hearing. Her frustration. Her contempt. The exact sentence. I don't need a mute freak. There it was. Not paraphrased. Not remembered. Not imagined. Recorded. Timestamped. My hands went cold. I didn't feel victory. Not yet. I felt something heavier, proof that my marriage didn't just end, it collapsed with cruelty. I emailed the file to Martin immediately, along with screenshots of the metadata and a written explanation of how and why it was recorded. He called me the next morning, voice unusually animated. "This is significant," he said carefully. "This isn't just abandonment. This is emotional abuse, and it supports your timeline. Judges don't like opportunistic spouses showing up after the money appears." I typed, "So she loses?" Martin paused. "It doesn't guarantee anything. But it changes the posture. We can negotiate from strength." Negotiate. The word made me want to throw up. Because there are some things you shouldn't have to bargain over. Dignity is one of them. Still, Martin's job wasn't revenge. It was protection. He sent Lauren's attorney a formal response, evidence of abandonment, financial documentation showing she contributed nothing after leaving, and, without attaching it yet, a note that we had an audio recording of her leaving statements that directly contradicted her claims. Within hours, Lauren's attorney replied with a completely different tone. They requested a private discussion. Lauren called me that evening from a blocked number. I didn't answer, obviously. She left a voicemail anyway, like she'd forgotten the basic facts of my life. Maybe she hadn't forgotten. Maybe she just didn't care. Her voicemail was all sweetness and urgency. She said she missed me, that she never meant it like that people say things when they're scared. She said she deserved a conversation after everything we built. Everything we built. I replayed that line a few times, jaw clenched. Because the only thing we built was a debt mountain and a silence she walked away from. Martin advised me not to engage directly, so I didn't. Instead, we scheduled mediation. Lauren arrived in a tailored blazer like she was attending a job interview. She looked at my scars with her eyes first, then forced herself to meet my gaze. I noticed she didn't sit too close. She brought a new husband energy with her, confidence borrowed from someone else's belief that she was the victim. She tried to talk to me like old times, using that gentle voice people use when they want something and don't want to seem like they want it. She apologized vaguely. She said she'd been young and overwhelmed. She said she'd never stopped caring. I didn't respond out loud. I typed, showed the screen when necessary, let Martin handle most of it. Lauren's lawyer argued the technicalities, legal marriage, lack of formal separation, potential claim to growth during marriage. Martin responded with receipts, her leaving date, proof of separate finances, my medical debt payments, and the fact that my company's growth happened after she vanished. Then Lauren made a mistake. She looked at Martin and said something like, he wouldn't have been able to do any of this without me pushing him to try new things. I kept him from giving up. My fingers hovered over the phone keyboard. Because that lie was so clean, so confident, that for a second I understood something ugly. She had practiced it. She'd rehearsed the version of reality where she was the supportive wife, the survivor of tragedy, the woman who stood by her man until he recovered and then abandoned her. It was a story made for sympathy. And it might have worked, too, if not for the fact that radio people never throw away raw audio. Martin leaned forward slightly. "We have a recording," he said, calm as a metronome. "From the night you left." Lauren blinked. "Recording?" Martin didn't show it yet. He didn't need to. The mere existence changed the room. Lauren's face drained of color so fast it looked theatrical. Her lawyer frowned. "What kind of recording?" Martin answered, "A continuous audio file from inside the marital home. Timestamped. It captures key statements and the circumstances of departure." Lauren stared at me, and for the first time since she'd walked out, her eyes had fear in them. Not guilt. Fear. She swallowed hard and forced a laugh that didn't land. She said she didn't remember saying anything like that it sounded manipulated, that I was always dramatic. Then she slipped, just a little, because she couldn't stand not being in control. She said, quietly, "You're really going to do this to me?" Do this to her. Like holding up a mirror was violence. The mediator suggested a break. Lawyers stepped out. Lauren stayed behind, staring at me like she wanted to burn holes through my scars. I typed one sentence and showed it to her. "You left me to die in silence." Her lips trembled, not with remorse, but with anger. She leaned forward and hissed something under her breath about how she deserved compensation after wasting years on me. Wasting years. As if love had been an investment with bad returns. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced down, and whatever she saw made her posture change, stiffen, alert. She looked up at me again, eyes sharp. And I knew, instantly, something else was happening. Because Lauren didn't come back just for money. She came back because she thought she had leverage. And whatever was on that phone, whatever message she'd just received, told her she might still get what she wanted. Even with the recording. That night, after mediation, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was scared of losing money. Because Lauren's face, when Martin mentioned the recording, didn't look like someone caught in a lie who realizes she's done. It looked like someone recalculating. Like someone who still thinks they have a move. I kept replaying that moment when her phone buzzed, and her whole body shifted. That wasn't random. It was timing. So I did what I'd learned to do since my life fell apart. I dug. Not in a stalker way. In a survival way. I went through every old shared account I still had access to, not passwords I wasn't allowed to use, not anything illegal. Just the boring stuff people forget, subscription emails, old cloud logins, device lists. And I found something almost immediately. When Lauren left, she'd been sloppy. She'd removed her card from the shared bank account, but she hadn't removed her number from a shared Apple family plan we'd once used for music. I hadn't noticed because I barely listened to anything anymore. But the plan showed something else, her location history requests and device activity in the early weeks after she left. It was subtle. Not enough to track her day-to-day. But enough to see that she hadn't vanished into a new life overnight. She'd been close. Close enough to keep tabs. And that matched something that had always bothered me, the timing of her return. She didn't reach out when I was in the hospital. She didn't reach out when I was drowning in debt. She didn't reach out when I was learning to sign in rehab. She reached out when the money showed up. When the press started. When my app's name started circulating. Which meant she'd been watching. And if she'd been watching, she'd likely been planning. I opened my email and searched her name. Most messages were junk, old bills, old confirmations. But then I saw something that didn't belong, a forwarded message from months ago, buried in spam, that mentioned a potential claim and marital asset strategy. It wasn't from her. It was from someone she'd talked to, someone who'd been shopping legal options. The date on it was weeks before she sent her "proud of you" message. So mediation wasn't her first step. It was step 10. I sent that email to Martin. He responded quickly, "This helps show opportunism and bad faith." Bad faith. Another lawyer phrase. But the truth was simpler, Lauren didn't come back because she remembered love. She came back because she smelled money. Still, none of this explained why she looked confident after the recording reveal. So I asked Martin a blunt question, what's her best move now? His reply, delay. Attack authenticity. Claim she contributed indirectly. Try to force settlement before court. Or, try to pressure you with embarrassment. Embarrassment. That word landed heavy. Because I had something else Lauren didn't understand about me anymore. When I lost my voice, I stopped being afraid of being seen. The scars already made me visible. Silence already made me different. What else could she take? Then I remembered something. A feature. The one I'd built because deaf users requested it, because they wanted safety. Inside my app, there was a function called Trusted Transcript. It allowed users to record conversations and instantly generate a timestamped transcript, then securely back it up to the cloud with a verification hash. It was designed for situations where someone might later deny what they said, like landlords, employers, or, yes, family. I had built it for other people. But I could use it too. So when Lauren emailed again requesting a private talk without lawyers, I agreed, on one condition, public place, daylight, and I would be using my app for communication. She couldn't argue without sounding suspicious. We met at a coffee shop near the river. Neutral territory. She showed up dressed like she'd stepped out of a lifestyle ad. She sat across from me and immediately started performing, regret, nostalgia, softness. She asked about my health. She touched her chest dramatically when she looked at my scars. She said she hated herself for leaving. I didn't trust a word. I turned on Trusted Transcript. Lauren didn't notice. It looked like any other accessibility feature. She started with the familiar angle, we're still married, we should settle this privately, she didn't want to hurt me. I typed, what do you want? She smiled like she'd been waiting for that cue. She said she wasn't greedy. She just wanted, what's fair? She said half. I typed, you left. Her smile tightened. She said she left because she was overwhelmed, but that didn't mean she forfeited everything we built. I typed, we built debt. Her eyes hardened for a fraction of a second, then softened again. She said something like, don't do this. You know how it works. If you fight, I can make this ugly. There it was. I typed, ugly how? Lauren leaned in, voice quieter. Her eyes flicked around like she was checking if anyone could hear. Then she said the sentence that explained everything, why she still looked confident after the recording reveal. She said she'd spoken with a friend in media. Someone who could tell a story. She said she could go public and paint me as bitter, unstable, cruel. She said she could claim I recorded her without consent and frame it as harassment. She could ruin the brand. My brand. The app wasn't just code anymore. It was reputation. And Lauren knew it. She kept talking, momentum building. She said I owed her. She said my success belonged to her too. She said if I didn't settle, she'd file motions, drag it out, and make sure every investor I talked to learned what kind of man I really was. I sat there, calm. Not because I wasn't furious. Because my app was transcribing every word. Timestamped. Verified. I typed one more thing, say clearly what you'll do if I don't give you half. Lauren rolled her eyes, annoyed, impatient, and spelled it out. She said she'd go to the press. She said she'd accuse me of misconduct. She said she'd destroy me if she couldn't cash in. Then she sat back like she'd delivered a masterpiece. And that was the moment I knew the ending. Not revenge in the movie sense. Justice in the boring, legal, undeniable sense. I typed, "Thank you." She blinked. "For what?" I didn't answer. I stood up, left cash on the table, and walked out. That night, Martin listened to the recording and read the transcript. When he called me, his voice was quiet but firm. "This," he said, "is what ends it." We filed immediately, not just responding to her claim, but requesting expedited divorce proceedings and sanctions for bad faith litigation tactics. We attached the verified transcript from our coffee shop meeting and the original audio file from the night she left. Two bookends of the same person: cruelty when I was broken, threats when I was successful. Lauren's attorney dropped her like a hot pan within a week. Not officially, of course. They called it a conflict. But everyone knew what it was: a sinking ship. Lauren tried to pivot one last time, emails full of tears and apologies and, "Let's not destroy each other." But it was too late. The judge didn't need to like me. He just needed to see the pattern. And patterns are hard to deny when they're recorded. In the final ruling, Lauren didn't get half. She didn't get a slice. She got nothing beyond a clean divorce and a warning about filing frivolous claims. The judge referenced abandonment and noted her attempt to leverage publicity for financial gain. When the gavel came down, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt light. Like something had finally been cut loose. A month later, I signed the paperwork that made my company officially mine, fully, legally, undeniably. And then I did something I didn't expect. I sent Lauren one last message. Not an insult. Not a victory lap. Just a sentence, typed cleanly and calmly. "You were right about one thing: I didn't need you." I blocked her everywhere after that. And the funniest part? I still don't have my voice back the way it used to be. But my app does, in a way. It speaks for people who need it. It spoke for me when I couldn't. And it made sure that the silence Lauren tried to bury me in was the same silence that finally buried her lies.